Before we begin, forget charts, forget tickers, forget everything you think you know about silver. This is not a story about jewelry or coin collections. It's not even really a story about inflation. This is a story about power, supply chains, and a single metal hiding in plain sight at the center of modern warfare. A metal so critical that without it, missiles don't launch, satellites go dark, and the most advanced weapons ever built simply stop working. What you're about to hear is how national security quietly collided with raw materials, and why that collision matters far beyond the battlefield. Picture a Tomahawk cruise missile. 18 feet long, flying at roughly 550 miles per hour, capable of striking a target over 1,000 miles away with astonishing precision. It represents the cutting edge of American military power. When you look at that missile, you see steel, explosives, jet fuel, and advanced engineering. But what you don't see is the most important ingredient. Inside the guidance system, woven through the wiring, embedded in specialized military batteries, there are about 15 kilograms of pure silver, roughly 500 ounces. At today's prices, that silver might be worth $30,000 or $40,000, barely noticeable next to a missile that costs around $2 million to build. It looks insignificant on a balance sheet. But without that silver, the missile doesn't fly. The guidance system goes blind. The battery never delivers enough power to start the engine. No silver, no weapon. This is the reality most people miss. Silver is not just money. It's not just jewelry. It's a strategic material. For nearly 80 years, the United States fought wars under the assumption that raw materials would always be available. If demand increased, factories would respond. If weapons were lost, more could be built. Ships, planes, missiles, everything was assumed to be replaceable. That assumption is now breaking down. The United States government has sold its entire strategic silver stockpile. There are 0 ounces left in the national defense stockpile. At the same time, the US is engaged in a global arms race with countries that have been quietly hoarding silver for decades. To understand why this matters, you have to understand the physics. The military doesn't use silver because it's shiny or valuable. It uses silver because it is the best conductor of electricity and heat known to man. In a household appliance, copper is good enough. If something overheats or a signal degrades slightly, no one dies. But in a fighter jet flying at Mach 2 or a satellite operating in the vacuum of space, failure is not an option. You need electrons to move with minimal resistance. You need contacts that don't spark, don't corrode, and don't fail under extreme conditions. That metal is silver. Look at a modern military system. Silver-zinc batteries power torpedoes and advanced drones because they deliver enormous power relative to weight and are safer than lithium-ion alternatives. Jet engine bearings are often silver-plated because silver is the best solid lubricant available. If oil systems fail, silver can prevent engines from seizing mid-flight. Military satellites are saturated with silver, solar panels, connectors, bonding wires, communication systems. Radios and secure communications rely on silver-coated RF connectors to maintain signal integrity. This is why the Defense Logistics Agency classifies silver as a strategic material. You cannot run a 21st century military on 19th century metals. As weapons become more advanced, they consume more silver, not less. A World War II tank used relatively little. A modern Abrams tank is essentially a computer on tracks, packed with sensors, electronics, and silver. Warfare has been digitized, and by digitizing it, national security has been tethered to the supply of a precious metal. So logically, you'd assume the United States maintains a massive silver reserve. Vaults somewhere underground, filled with bars waiting for emergencies. Once upon a time that was true. In the 1940s and 1950s, the US held over 3 billion ounces of silver, the largest stockpile in history. It was a strategic asset used for coinage, industry, and even the Manhattan Project. But complacency crept in. In the 1960s, silver was removed from circulating coins. Policymakers decided money was becoming digital, war was becoming nuclear, and silver was obsolete. So they sold it. For decades, the government dumped silver onto the market through auctions and commemorative programs, suppressing prices and flooding global supply. By the early 2000s, the Defense Logistics Agency quietly admitted the truth. The national defense stockpile of silver was effectively empty. The last bars were sold. The vaults were closed. Today, the US government owns virtually no silver. When the US Mint needs metal for silver eagles, it buys blanks on the open market. When defense contractors need silver for missiles, they buy it like any other customer. America went from being the Saudi Arabia of silver to having no buffer at all. This brings us to the logistics problem. For decades, the Pentagon adopted the corporate model of just-in-time delivery. The assumption was simple: global trade would always function. If silver was needed, it could be ordered and delivered quickly. That works in peacetime. It collapses in a resource war. Commercial giants like Apple, Samsung, and Tesla are consuming massive amounts of silver. The available float is shrinking. Defense contractors move slowly, bound by bureaucracy and fixed-price contracts. If silver prices rise, they hesitate. They wait for prices to fall. But the prices aren't falling and inventory is drying up. Lead times for military-grade silver components are stretching from weeks into months. Weapon systems are being delayed. Officials call it supply chain issues. What they really mean is simple: the metal isn't there. The US built a military assuming infinite supply in a world of finite scarcity. The just-in-time military is becoming the too-late military. Now compare that with China. While the United States was selling its silver, China was buying. For over 20 years, China has aggressively accumulated precious metals, built domestic refining capacity, encouraged citizen ownership, and restricted exports of raw silver. They understand a brutal truth: in war, trade routes close first. If the metal is inside your borders, you keep building weapons. If you rely on open markets that suddenly shut down, you are defenseless. This creates a dangerous asymmetry. China holds physical silver. The United States holds paper claims. If paper markets fail, China still builds missiles. The US files lawsuits. This is a national security emergency barely discussed in public. But the Pentagon is starting to notice. Analysts see the red lights flashing. They know that a conflict in the Pacific or a disruption in South American mining could halt production lines within weeks. This is where the story turns. Because when a massive institution realizes it made a historic mistake, it doesn't ask politely. In the next part, we'll look at how the US government is preparing to respond, the executive orders, the legal tools, and the mechanisms that allow the military to cut the line and take priority over the civilian market. The government is done selling. It's preparing to take. We talked about the whale in our previous video series, but now it's time to challenge that assumption. What if the whale isn't Microsoft or Apple or some mysterious hedge fund operating in the shadows? What if the real whale is the Department of Defense itself, quietly trying to correct a strategic mistake it made 30 years ago? Because this is the ultimate put option on silver. The buyer that matters most isn't price-sensitive, isn't profit-driven, and isn't allowed to fail. The entity with the printing press doesn't need cheap silver. It needs physical silver, period. Dollars can be created infinitely. Silver cannot. As an investor, that's the trade you want to be in front of. You want to own the asset the government must buy to keep its military functioning. Not wants to buy, must buy. Missiles, satellites, drones, guidance systems, all of them stop without silver. That turns silver from a commodity into a strategic choke point. Yes, the US government has the legal authority to seize domestic supply. Yes, it has every incentive to hoard. But there's a massive problem that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. The silver isn't in the United States. America mines very little silver at home. Most of it comes from Mexico, Peru, and China. And this is where the Defense Production Act hits a wall. Washington can order a factory in Ohio to comply. It cannot command a mine in Mexico to dig faster. It cannot force a Peruvian smelter to ship metal to New York instead of Shanghai. And it certainly cannot order a Chinese-owned mine in Africa to supply the US Navy. That's the reality keeping Pentagon planners awake at night. The United States consumes far more silver than it produces. Nearly 80% of its supply is imported. When it comes to the metal that powers modern weapons, America is dependent, and dependency is weakness. According to the US Geological Survey, the numbers are brutal. The United States produces roughly 1,000 metric tons of silver per year, but consumes close to 5,000. That's a structural deficit of 4,000 tons every single year. The math simply doesn't work. For decades, policymakers assumed it didn't matter. Free trade would guarantee supply. NAFTA would keep the metal flowing north. Money would solve everything. But in a resource-constrained world, money loses its power. If Mexico decides to keep its silver, the United States cannot print silver into existence. This dependency creates a strategic vulnerability. If supply lines are disrupted by geopolitics, pandemics, or hostile actors buying metal at the source, the U.S. defense industrial base begins to starve within months. Washington knows this, which is why it launched the Mineral Security Partnership in 2022. Think of it as a NATO for metals. The idea is friendshoring. Mine in friendly countries, refine in allied nations, manufacture at home, and cut China and Russia out of the loop. On paper, it sounds like a solution. In reality, it's deeply flawed. The problem is simple. The partnership is full of consumers, not producers. The countries that actually control large silver reserves, Mexico, Peru, Bolivia, Chile, are increasingly resource nationalist. They're asking why they should sell their wealth cheaply so foreign powers can build green economies and advanced weapons. This tension comes to a head in Mexico, the Saudi Arabia of silver. Nearly a quarter of global silver production comes from Mexican soil. Political winds there are shifting fast. Lithium has already been nationalized. Mining permits are being restricted. Taxes and royalties are rising. Now imagine silver at $80 an ounce. Foreign mining companies report record profits. And Mexico decides it wants a bigger share, or decides to keep the metal entirely. Export bans, windfall taxes, mandatory domestic refining. Any one of these moves would hit the U.S. supply chain like a sledgehammer. Canada can't replace that supply. Poland is too far and too exposed geopolitically. Mexico holds the leverage and it knows it. This is the real Mexican standoff. The United States needs the metal. Mexico wants the power. While Washington scrambles to build alliances, China has been executing a different strategy entirely. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, Chinese state-owned companies have spent decades buying mines, ports, roads, and smelters across Latin America and Africa. They don't just invest. They lock in offtake agreements. First shipment rights. Guaranteed supply. So even when a mine sits in Peru, the silver often belongs to Beijing before it ever leaves the ground. This represents a strategic failure of enormous scale. Since the Monroe Doctrine, the United States claimed dominance in the Western Hemisphere. But now China is already there, inside the mines, inside the infrastructure, inside the supply chain. When a superpower needs a resource to survive and the owner won't sell, history shows what comes next. Iran in 1953. Chile in 1973. Resources have always justified intervention. Silver may not be different. If silver becomes an existential requirement for military power, access to it becomes non-negotiable. That reality adds a permanent war premium to silver prices. This is no longer just about supply and demand. It's about power, leverage, and survival. The only real solution for the United States is to rebuild what it threw away, a strategic silver stockpile. The Pentagon cannot rely on just-in-time delivery anymore. It needs hundreds of millions of ounces sitting in guarded vaults, ready before the first shot is fired. Analysts estimate that a meaningful buffer would require up to 500 million ounces. But global annual production is only around 830 million ounces. You cannot buy that quietly without changing the market forever. So the buying won't be announced. It will be slow, systematic, and relentless. Possibly routed through opaque mechanisms like the Exchange Stabilization Fund. Proxies will buy, vaults will fill. And the public will only see the result: shortages, empty shelves, soaring premiums. This is the concept of the infinite bid. Governments don't care about charts or technical indicators. When silver gets expensive, missiles just get more expensive. Congress prints the difference. The check clears. That makes the military a price-insensitive buyer and puts a concrete floor under the market. As supply is pulled into strategic reserves, the civilian market gets crowded out. The U.S. Mint is already flashing warning signs with repeated suspensions. Eventually, the official price won't matter. The metal simply won't be available. This is the civilian lockout. The window to exchange paper currency for strategic metal is open now, but it won't stay open forever. The conclusion is unavoidable. Silver is not just an investment. It is a geopolitical necessity. You're holding the asset the modern empire requires to function. The empire forgot to stockpile. Now it's waking up in a panic. And when it moves with unlimited money. The physics of war demands silver. And physics always wins.